Welcome to Oaklandia, the podcast, where we are exposing the injustice in social justice. We are your hosts, the Back Home Brothers. I am Caleb, the one who is speaking. And on my
I'm
left,
Joseph. I am the intro music.
or maybe on my right, I don't know. Anyway, the other guy is the intro music singer, Joseph.
And the website is wokelandia.com, where you can find podcasts, and you can also find the game.
Find it all. Everything you need in Wokelandia is on wokelandia.com. So is your idea to talk about this one today, Joseph? It's a crazy topic, interesting topic, very timely with the election coming up.
Yes.
You want to introduce it to us?
Fetterman, everyone's favorite Pennsylvania Democrat senator candidate. And
the only option, as it turns out now,
candidate. Yes. And
you might wish it wasn't the only option, but it is on the Democrat side.
He might end up actually being a U.S. senator yet. But Mr. Fetterman and Dr. Oz had a debate last week. And one of the biggest issues in this debate is the fact that Fetterman had a stroke 4, 5, 6 months ago, something like that now.
Right before the primary, like a month before the primary, I think. So
yeah, I think I don't remember the date, but yes, he had a stroke and it affected his impairment. And he has been running. He's been the nominee for the Democrats during this entire time that he has had this stroke. And he had a debate with Dr. Oz and start off by saying that it's not fun when somebody has a health complication that impairs them. And he is certainly impaired. He is admittedly impaired. Hopefully he is not permanently impaired because, we just don't wish that on people. Now, it's also true that I don't agree with Fetterman's policies, and so I'm unlikely to vote for him under any circumstances. But one of the issues right now is whether he is able to perform the job duties of a U.S. senator. He had a couple weeks ago, he did an interview, and the reporter who interviewed him after the interview, and during the interview, he had to actually read the questions. He had a monitor in front of him. She would say the questions, he'd have to read them, and then he'd respond. And she, after the interview, commented about the fact that it was very difficult to have a conversation with him. He was clearly, he had a difficult time tracking what she would say. And if you go back and watch the debate, he has difficulty putting sentences together, right? And tons of sympathy for people who are struggling with that, because it's not fun for him. It's not fun for anybody. But that's just the reality of the situation. Now, this, of course, because he's a candidate, the issue is, does this disqualify him in some way?
Let me throw something out real quick before we get into the question about ableism you're going to talk about. Apparently his doctor released a statement saying that he is fine or something to that effect and able to run and able to serve and able to do everything. So are you hearing that he's actually fine and this is how he is, or that he's actually still fighting and struggling with the stroke from the doctor's report? Because I've heard both sides.
He is certainly struggling with the effects of the stroke, right?
Yeah,
he is not back to 100%.
But his doctor said ever get back?
Well, okay, in the sense that it's probably not. It's not going to impair his health anymore to be doing this, right? I don't know that he hasn't released medical records. The doctor, undoubtedly, again, being a U.S. senator is not a particularly taxing job physically, right? And in fairness to John Fetterman, there are lots of octogenarians in the Senate who are basically figureheads, right? And that's a bipartisan problem. You have people there who have been there for generations. They are functionally just not doing anything. They show up and they vote the way their staff tells them to. The staff does all the work. They really are. There's a lot of kind of weekend at Bernie stuff going on in the U.S. Senate.
And there's one in the White House that doesn't talk great either all the time.
Correct. So it's not like being a U.S. senator is a super physically taxing job necessarily. Now,
I guess part of the question too is this how he is now? Is that the doctor saying that he is recovered?
Yeah.
And this is just.
Well, we have no way of knowing this, right? Well, and Personally, our father has had a
Right.
stroke recently. And what he's been told and what he's relayed to me is that it's about 2 years post-stroke that they expect recovery. Wherever you're at 2 years after the fact is basically where you're going to be. And so he's about 6 months.
So there's hope that he will continue to improve.
Yes. So hopefully he will continue to prove his functioning will get better. I don't think there's any guarantee of that.
I'd be curious to know if there's a doctor's report saying that or not. I haven't seen that, but
well, you can't know that.
Others, hopefully that's the case.
I don't think a doctor can know that things are going to get back to 100%. I think you do your best, but strokes leave lasting impressions.
And they're different for different people,
right?
maybe.
Yeah. So let's get to the point here. Is the question is about this criticism and some of the commentary. And, of course, all of this is partisan because the Democrats want him to win regardless of his capacity or lack of capacity, because he would vote for the right person for majority leader, and therefore they would, they could theoretically keep control of the Senate. And from a partisan perspective, that's all that matters. And it's the same way Republicans are going to leverage whatever they can to defeat him because they want the power in the Senate, right? And every seat is really important. That being said, the criticism of him and what we want to talk about is how legitimate that is. But one of the defenses of Fetterman, it's a response to the analysis, is they're saying criticism of Fetterman and his stroke is ableism. And that's not a term that's used very often. And I'm going to read from this ABC News article that kind of covers this.
Yeah.
And I'll read a couple paragraphs from this. It says, still, disability advocate groups say ableism has been continuously thrown at Fetterman throughout his campaign since his stroke by Republican candidate Dr. Mehmet Oz's team, though the doctor himself has expressed empathy toward Fetterman's condition. Here's the article continues. It says, ableism refers to discrimination against people with disabilities. So that's what we're talking about. It's been frankly a distraction, said Seth Ginsburg, president and co-founder of the disability advocacy group Global Healthy Living Foundation and Creaky Joints. Ginsburg continued, we hear daily from people with chronic diseases that they've experienced social prejudice and diminished opportunities based on people's assumptions about how or what they can or cannot do with their conditions. So I'll stop there. That's ABC News. We've got this definition of what ableism is: discrimination against people with disabilities. And now let's talk about this, Caleb, because, this is Wokelandia. We're talking about wokeness. There's this term that gets attached to it. And is it unjust? Is it not fair? Why is this term being attached to it? Is it unjust to ask questions about whether a senatorial candidate is physically capable of accomplishing the job? Is that ableism? Is that term being used as a way to discourage people from being critical of the condition? Is that appropriate? Is that, oppression? Yeah.
And I both sympathize and disagree with the term. And so the issue with ableism is actually the ability to do the job. And so someone who is disabled, which I guess is still the right term to use. These terms change every 90 seconds, it seems like. But somebody who is disabled.
Differently abled.
Is that differently abled now?
And I actually don't object to that. I mean, honestly, if we're in a wheelchair, right? I mean, you're doing the best that you can, and it is. And I think that the part of this that is legitimate is that people who have diminished capacity in some way, people are skeptical. It's like I don't know. I mean, most people don't have experience with somebody who is disabled, so they kind of don't know how to react in that situation. And it's confusing. What can I say? What can I not say? It's easier to retreat, right, and just kind of not acknowledge it. So I would say, yeah, on some level, I can totally sympathize with somebody who is disabled. Their brain is fine. They want to do things. They want to be meaningful, but everybody kind of assumes they're not capable rather than finding out what they are capable of, right?
Yeah. And for me, the question is, does a disability relate to the job at hand? And that is where really it comes down to it. It seems like some of these comments I've seen on Twitter just over the last 2 days or 3 days or so, really since that debate in the last week, is he somehow more qualified now that he's had a stroke? Because he is, if you say, I don't support him because of the fact that he can't speak well, then that's ableist. But the problem is that the job entails the ability to communicate. being in
Maybe.
the Senate.
I,
Well,
mean,
it should.
I think that begs the question, because I think, and here's the thing that's fair. If the roles were reversed, if there was somebody on a policy level that I knew would vote the right way, would I vote for them even if they had significant like verbal challenges over like, Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders or Nancy Pelosi?
John Fetterman.
100%. 100%. I mean, so I get it from a purely why? I mean, it's not preferable that my candidate can't articulate their position in a way that's persuasive. But I also, on some level, don't care. And that's what I think the left is taking this position. As long as you're going to punch the button in the right direction,
from their standpoint,
you're still better than the partisan opponent, right?
Right. And that's the discussion, because some disabilities do disqualify you from a job. If you're in a wheelchair, you're disqualified from most professional sports because you can't do the job. And saying, well, you have a broken leg, but you still can go out there. I mean, in the NFL, every week people become disabled. And
is it ableism to deny blind people driver's licenses?
Right. And it's not, because they can't do the job. I
saw it is discriminatory
on it a few years ago about
I mean, and
the braille on the side of the road. It's like, how are the blind people following the braille on the side of the restaurant here when they're in the drive-through restaurant? It was a hilarious sketch, but it played off. Well, obviously it's not wrongly discriminatory to tell a blind person they can't drive. But does it factor in? I think if they had to do it over now, knowing what they know, maybe they would have voted for the other Democrat in the primary, because I don't think Fetterman is able to represent his side well at all right now, which makes him a disadvantage in the election, of course, to do that.
Yeah, that makes it a disadvantage as a candidate.
Right.
This definition, though, discrimination, ableism refers to discrimination against people with disabilities. Telling a blind person you can't get a driver's license is technically discrimination. Is it appropriate discrimination? Of course. And everybody understands why that is. Yeah. And, the woke part of this, and I think the reason why this term is being thrown out so much post the debate, is the isms, the classism, the ageism, the sizeism, the racism, the sexism, the ableism. We live in, once we attach an ism to something, it carries this like moral significance, right? And we've talked about the fact that in critical theory, it's the whole, you have the oppressors versus the oppressed. And once you label something an ism, you're no longer supposed to be critical of something, because we know that if you say men and women are different, that's sexism.
And there's an effort to silence the other side.
Or it could be transphobia, right? Depending on which context, but it's an ism. It's a bad thing. And so as soon as that label is applied, you're supposed to stop asking questions. And that's how this language is used, is, we know, as soon as somebody says racism, well, that's terrible, I'm going to back away. I'm going to not do that, because the last thing in the world I want to be is racist. And that's sexist, whatever that is. And so I think what we're seeing here is another example of that, where as soon as we attach the label, and I think politically, this is what's going on. The reason they know that John Fetterman did not have a great appearance in the debate, right? He did not acquit himself well. It's not necessarily his fault. Now, based on previous statements, John Fetterman was never going to win oratory awards, right? That's not his strength in life. I'm sure he has many talents. That is not necessarily the one that God gifted him with naturally. Now, throw on the stroke, it's particularly complicated, right? And so in order to kind of rehabilitate this, and this is the tactic that's always used. And to the extent there was any actual like cruel personal attacks of a guy who had a stroke, that's bad, right? But asking questions, can this guy accomplish this job? Is he capable of doing this given his physical condition? Once we throw the term ableism on it, that's the cue for everybody to back off, stop asking those questions, because you're being oppressive by asking the question. And that's the tactic that is used in so many different contexts to give people an excuse not to deal with the merits of the argument, but to make you feel bad about making the argument in the first place. So if somebody says, hey, we should really consider whether John Fetterman has the ability to perform this job. Oh, that's ableist. Oh, I withdraw the question.
But that's a key question, that I think we probably don't talk about enough is, what do we want our senators to do, our representatives? Do they need to be able to represent their side well? Do they need to be able to think through the issues and articulate the issues in a good manner, in a persuasive manner? And the fact is he can't do that right now, but is it still better than having the other side who can articulate, but they're articulating the wrong things and voting the wrong way? And so it brings up an interesting dilemma, I guess.
And the real reality is the partisans in these races, hard left and hard right, those who already have their minds made up, they're like, I don't care. I don't need him to like persuade everybody. I just need him to vote the right way. But the reality is that's about a third roughly on each side, right? Those people, their minds are made up. They weren't persuadable anyway. A third of them were always going to vote for John Fetterman. Doesn't matter if he can't speak. I mean, they'd vote for him if he was dead, if he was going to vote the right way, right? And then there's other people. It doesn't matter if John Fetterman is William Wilberforce, right? They're not going to vote for him because his oratory skills are amazing. They're going to vote for him or against him because they don't like the way he's going to vote. And then you have the people in the middle who are going to make those decisions. And the reason everybody's concerned about this is you have people in the middle who might care. It's like that. They kind of blow in the wind. Where's it going? They decide every election. And so the Fetterman supporters and the Democrats, they're basically worried that this narrative is going to affect the middle and drive them away from Fetterman because he clearly has difficulty communicating. So they're going to say, oh, that's ableist not to vote for him. How dare you ask those questions as a way of getting Fetterman's opponents
to silence the other side. And that's probably the main concern here, is using a term to try to silence somebody else rather than thinking through and talking through the topic itself and deciding if it's even legitimate, which maybe some people don't think it matters. All it matters is if you click the right button. And you made a case that you and I probably kind of think that way a little bit. I mean, we would, I don't know. It's a tough one to say. Obviously, we would both prefer an articulate person. Would we prefer an articulate conservative to an articulate leftist to an inarticulate conservative?
Yeah,
probably not.
No, I mean, I would not. I mean, if it's Barack Obama versus a conservative John Fetterman, I'm voting for the conservative John Fetterman, right? I mean, I am. That's just the way it is. And that's how most of the leftists and that's how the Fetterman camp feels. But there's a lot of people who aren't like you and I, and our minds aren't made up about everything. And we don't have strong convictions, and they're just kind of seeing how they feel today. And they don't feel great about a guy who can't answer a question well, being their U.S. senator. And so they'll vote for the guy who is articulate, because so much of campaigning and debates is just kind of
unless they're tagged with the label labelist or ableist. And now it's like, ooh, I don't want to do that.
Exactly. So, and so, I mean,
I don't.
The point is not to figure, I mean, we can have a long discussion about what our senators what should be expected of them. And frankly, I think we should probably expect more than we're actually getting at this point. But the introduction of the term ableism into the debate is one that we need to recognize how that is done and why that is done. And those labels, ableist, ageist, sexist, racist, whatever, all of those isms and ists are done to distract from the merits of the debate itself. It's a valuable debate that the Fetterman-Oz campaign and the voters of Pennsylvania should be able to have, and frankly, Americans should be able to have. What should we expect of our U.S. senators cognitively, or with their speaking skills? Would you vote for somebody who's mute? Right? There's nothing wrong with being mute. People are born that way, and they're made in the image of God, and they have value, and they should be able to pursue their dreams. Would it be wrong for voters to vote for a mute U.S. senator who has to sign, and limited in who he can communicate with? No, I mean, that's not disqualifying in my view, right? So that's a conversation we could have, and we might be able to get to the point where, if John Fetterman, if he can think well, he can solve problems well, he can tell when somebody's lying to him, and maybe his speech, his word formation is challenged, but cognitively he's there, then maybe we're going to vote for him. But that's the conversation that should happen.
And the question we ask is, are you trying to silence the other side through the use of a label to just shut down the conversation? And that, of course, has long been a concern of mine of the left. And they're not even secretive about it. I mean, the whole thing with Twitter going down at the same time, Elon Musk coming in and saying, okay, you can all talk on Twitter now again. The left, of course, hates that. We don't have time to get into that conversation today, but it's along the same lines. Twitter actively silenced their opponents. Is the use of the term ableist an effort to do the same sort of thing, to get someone to self-silence and say, oh, I don't want to have that label, therefore I'm going to go ahead and just go along and not speak out, not have the conversation because I don't want that label applied.
And there's a lot of people who would immediately retreat from whatever position they were taking the moment someone accuses them of being some sort of ist,
right,
or of violating some sort of ism. And that's the manipulation in all of this that people have to be aware of, and that just so permeates wokelandia that's such a common tactic. And so for those of us who care about ideas, it's just a matter of recognizing when that happens. Say, I understand what you're saying. Let's talk about the merits of the argument. Let's give each other the benefit of the doubt about our motives. And let's behave appropriately and recognize that people who have challenges in life are no less deserving of pursuing their dreams and contributing to the society as everybody else. But let's talk about that. Is this particular challenge going to disqualify them from doing this particular role? Maybe they need to find something else they're better suited for, or do we not care? That's what we need to talk about. Not, are you being ist or ism in some way by even raising the question
and being silenced that way. Yeah.
So
I think that gets to the nut of the issue. So good job bringing that one up and hashing that out here. So I think that covers this episode of Wokelandia, talking about John Fetterman, the debate, and the intent potentially by some to just silence the other side by throwing a label and hoping they will self-censor and self-silence. We don't want that in our world. We want people talking through the issues, not labeling each other. So thanks a lot for joining us on this episode of Wokelandia. We'll be back again soon. Who knows? Could be very soon, as these topics keep coming up every day and they're fun to talk about and explore. So thanks a lot for joining us. I'm Caleb.
And I'm Joseph. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.